Welcome everyone to our webinar on 2022 or 2020 Part 2. We're excited to have you join us. We'll cover a little bit of housekeeping while we wait for all of our participants to log into the webinar. We will be recording our session today, and that will be sent out after our session. So later today, you should expect to get a recording. As we share throughout the next 30 minutes, please feel free to enter questions into the Q&A or send them to us in the chat feature. And again, we are talking today about 2022 or 2020 Part 2. This is what agile and resilient sales organizations are doing today. I am Michelle Richardson. I am Vice President of our Sales Performance Research Center here at the Brooks Group. I am joined by Russ Scherer, our Director of Strategic Sales Excellence. Thank you, Russ, for joining us.
Good afternoon. Every time I see this title, I think of Monty Python. Didn't they have like a movie that was called like Part Deux?
Yes, yes.
Which was a bad, my friend. I get that. And you know, I was thinking through this, that Agile and Resilient, we did an episode of a webinar a few months ago where we talked about sort of living in a changing, world, and I just started making some notes here. We have COVID, we have supply chain issues, we have inflation, we have tariffs, we have all kinds of innovation going on in terms of the push to move more towards electric cars and away from gasoline powered engines. There's so much more. And so even if we just kind of think back and took the pandemic away, there's still an awful lot of things that we need to be getting better for in order to be resilient. So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, it just seems like as organizations, there's so much to take into account, right? And we think we're getting ahead, and then something new pops up. And so how do we cope? How do we as sales organizations cope and keep moving forward and making our teams as effective as possible? So what are we going to talk about today, Russ?
Well, we really have sort of two focuses. One is to answer the question, is it 2020 or 2022 from your peers, the sales leaders that we've worked with? So Michelle's got some new data to share with us. And then I want to talk about 6 trends. For those of you who don't know, Michelle and I have just finished a book. It was, I would say, sent off, via FedEx, but it all happens electronically these days. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we've identified sort of 6 trends that we saw accelerated through the pandemic, things that were happening and just moving faster. We're going to talk about not only those, but how should you be thinking about what's going on in your organization to deal with them.
Yes, thank you so much. And we are very excited about the book. You will hear us talk about it as we go. Just as a spoiler, everyone that's registered for the webinar today will receive a free preview of the book next week. That'll be coming to your emails, the first 2 chapters. And it really does culminate the work that Russ and I have been doing over the last 2 years. If those of you who have joined us on these webinars before know that we've been doing a lot of research on what's happening in sales, what is the impact of COVID, what is the impact of digital transformation, all the issues that we've been talking about, and we're really excited to share that with you all. So let's get started. Let's narrow it down a little bit and just talk about what's happening right now, first quarter 2022. And I want to thank each of you that completed our survey and gave us some insight into what's happening in your organization. So we asked, what is your outlook for the first quarter of 2022? What is it looking like in terms of your business? And as you can see here, 38% of you are slightly behind target. We are now at the end of January, so we are really 1/3 of the way through the calendar quarter of 2022. So 38% of you are slightly behind target, 23% are right on target, and 38% of you are ahead of target. So it's kind of an even split of organizations that are slightly behind and those that are trending ahead either slightly or significantly. We did also ask how your teams finished 2021. And interestingly enough, 38% were slightly ahead of target. So you finished the year, 38% of you, a little over a third, slightly ahead. Now you're trending slightly behind. 23% finished the year right on target as well. So that's trending steady as well. And about 46% finished ahead of target. So, we're in the new year. I think most organizations finished a little bit stronger in fourth quarter of 2021 than we were seeing earlier in the year. And now they're playing catch up a little bit. But we also know that a lot of organizations increased their targets this year, so that could be playing into it as well. So what's impacting these first quarter expectations? And Russ touched on a lot of these just in the opening, right? Supply chain, turnover, Omicron, inflation, margin pressure, stalled deals. So all of these things are kind of coming into play. And what we know is that it's likely a combination of factors. So we really don't have one runaway issue that's impacting everybody. I think it's from what we're seeing, it's a combination of things, right? So 19% of you said that supply chain and the availability of your products and services was really impacting your projections, and then staff turnover, finding and retaining talent. And then 17% said COVID, Omicron hitting your team specifically, and then inflation and price pressure. So what we are also seeing is the availability of buyers due to COVID is to a lesser extent impacting your first quarter expectations. I know we've seen that in our business. I've talked to a lot of organizations and clients who had people out with COVID or were meeting virtually and they're just getting over COVID. So certainly that's coming into play as well.
And so the dynamic here, Michelle, that I think is just so incredible. If we'd been sitting here 24 months ago, the end of January 2020, we might have been hearing about this virus that was starting to circulate. But of these 6 things impacting the results of our clients, 4 of them weren't even in existence. And there was probably some concern around staffing and some concern around stalled deals. But it just goes to show you how 2 years from now, we could be facing a whole different set of things. It's why agility and resilience are so important as we look forward.
Totally agree. And I think, you hit it when you said, just 2 years ago, 4 of these things weren't even in existence. What we're seeing, and I think what you and I have been talking about in the book and in previous webinars, it's the pace of change right now. There's multiple things coming at companies and it's happening quickly. And it's just accelerating. And so again, that idea of being agile, that idea of building resilient teams, resilient processes, and organizational structures to be able to deal with that change is imperative. And we also asked organizations how long they thought that, in particular, Omicron would be impacting their business directly. 38% said 6 to 8 weeks, and then 31% said 3 to 6 months. So that's kind of the big split. And it makes me think back, Russ, to when we started doing these webinars back in March of 2020. And we asked organizations then how long COVID would be a factor. And I think we were looking at like 6 to 8 weeks. Yep. And, here we are 2 years later. So
we just missed a digit. It's actually 68 weeks, or maybe it's 168 weeks or something.
Right. So, I also think where you are regionally, whether if you're in the US or in North America, or even internationally, your timeline for dealing with this, I think also is somewhat variable. So we talked about what's impacting your expectations, but how does that then translate to sales team challenges, right? So we asked, what is challenging your team, your sellers right now? And as you can see, some of the key words in our word wall there: relationships, product supply, lead generation, finding raw materials to produce what's being sold. That was one of the responses. Trying to rekindle those pre-pandemic relationships. There was one comment that I thought was really interesting. It's the availability of buyers, right, of their key contacts and accounts, because that keeps changing. So they're either leaving the company, or depending on people being out sick, you've got people filling different roles at different times. So just trying to understand organizational dynamics is a challenge. And then I think lead sourcing, prospecting, buyer indecision. So again, all these things that are impacting organizations with the supply chain and inflation and COVID and turnover, that's presenting quite unique challenges, I think, for sales teams. And then for sales leaders, we asked what's challenging sales leaders specifically, and that's all about talent, right? So how do we find the right people? We're having turnover. How do we retain the folks that we have? How do we motivate them with all of the challenges, again, that we're talking about, right? So how do we keep our morale up when they're having difficulty making contact with buyers? Or how do we keep morale up and really boost our teams when they're having to have these difficult conversations around price increases or product availability? So a lot of challenges really playing out with sales teams right now.
I was having a conversation with someone yesterday and mentioning some of these same trends. And he said, boy, it's depressing to be a sales leader right now. And, we kind of laughed and we said, well, there's opportunities as we go to the future, but it is tough right now for any leaders leading an organization or leading a team.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, yes, to your point, Russ, there's opportunity. So there's opportunity to potentially build your team the way you want. There's opportunity to make changes. There's opportunity to really stretch those leadership skills. If you want to put the positive spin, the realistic spin is you're 100% right. It is challenging for sales leaders right now. And we always want to present you with a sponsor for our webinars. And this session is sponsored by Confident Conversations. We've been talking about the challenging scenarios that are being plagued by sales teams and sales leaders, right? So your teams are having to go out and have price increase conversations. You're having to go out and discuss the availability or delays of your products. So how do we equip our sales teams to be able to confidently have these conversations? And we have just a program for you in Confident Conversations. So this is really about understanding buyer styles and communication styles, really equipping your sales team to read the styles and build rapport with their clients, with their prospects, and then be able to deliver difficult information in a way that will gain acceptance, that will build trust, words and techniques that will really resonate with buyers, and also how to avoid those triggers that might make the situation worse.
Sure.
Russ, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add to that those are great for external conversations. But the other thing is, how do you have conversations with those employees who may be wavering, right? The ones who we keep hearing about are resigning and moving on to other roles where there's something not quite right. And the challenge with some of these, I was looking at some data just this week that people are looking for, greater ability to work remotely or to have a flexible schedule or to travel or to take some time off. And how can you have those conversations in a way that's affirming to that employee, that helps them realize that you're both sensitive to that, but also understand the mission and maybe talk some of those folks who are wavering a little bit back into the fold. And those are tough conversations, having had them with people who've worked for me. And I'd encourage people to think about that aspect of Confident Conversations as well.
So if you're interested in learning more about our Confident Conversations program, just email us at contact@thebrooksgroup.com, and producer Rich has put that information in the chat. And again, I want to encourage folks to ask questions as we go. We'll have some Q&A at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box or send us a note in the chat. So Russ, 6 trends dominating sales.
Yes, and this is our take on what we're seeing in the marketplace. It fits, as we said earlier, into some of the work we've done in the new book. Number one is, you've heard this word probably, omni-channel, meaning I can get a product through a variety of different directions and sources. But to me, really, the thing that accelerated through the pandemic was that the B2C experience, or let's just call it the Amazon experience, is now something that everybody is expecting of the B2B buyer. The ability to see kind of what is the status of my order, where are the units, are they in stock, can I get them, are they going to come quickly or from a more distant warehouse. 2 days ago in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about how the a particular Chinese port was closed due to COVID and the impact that had on supply chains for the chip manufacturers and automotive and some of those other things we've been hearing about. And the Department of Commerce at the same time said, boy, it's the lowest inventories we've had relating to chips in years. There are low inventories everywhere. And our customers want to be able to understand sort of what's in inventory, and can I get an immediate answer when something is shutting down a line or slowing down a manufacturing line or a construction project or whatever it might be. I worked with a guy one time who was kind of old school. He said, first of all, you get the order, tell them whatever it takes, and then just stall. And it was a bad strategy then. It's a horrible strategy now. I think things like that of misleading folks without that transparency causes them to bump you far off the supplier line. Number two, not only are we seeing this demand for more information, but buyers in general are more empowered. They're asking for greater information when they need it. If you think back to this idea of omni-channel and shaping experiences, research, and we've talked about this before, say that buyers are less interested in meeting with salespeople than they used to be. What they're saying is we can get most of the information online. And so when we need something, we'll reach out and make that connection. It reminds me of a conversation I had on an airplane one time with a VP who was over a very large telecommunications group based here in the US. And I asked him if he was going to go to a trade show that was coming up in a couple of weeks on telecom. And he looked at me and he said, no, why should I? He said, I can put a call out to any vendor in the world, and within 24 hours, I'll have 3 of their best people in my office. And he recognized that power that they had as a buyer to bring people in. And so this idea that they're engaging salespeople later, that salespeople have to be able to bring more value into those interactions, because it's no longer casual conversations. They're now looking for things that can really help them make a decision. So what does that mean? A couple of tools, I think, or tips. I think you need to be kind of thinking about your IT game, frankly. We've talked about that a lot in terms of what web presence is there, what messaging is there, can your buyers easily access it? I hate to tell people just go look on Amazon, then compare what you've got to that, because you're never going to get as good or as big as they are. But be thinking about the kinds of things that people want to know. Especially is a good time to be listening to any reps or distributor people you've got, and understand what they're looking for. Usually, from my experience, there's always a wants list that they have, and a number of those have to do around transparency, visibility, et cetera. And it's been hard to deploy it from an IT perspective. But think about that. And in fact, just the last month, Pfizer made a big announcement. They're actually reducing the size of their field sales organization in order to invest more in IT and the web. And that's a pretty radical position. I'm not saying you should do that, but you should think about how are we going to make the investments that keep us competitive. Number 2, or maybe 3 and 4, I guess, is aggressive cost pressure continues. Even though we've seen inflation, even though we've seen supply chain issues, when it is in stock, there is pressure for you as the vendor to, as I love this expression, to share the pain. The idea that our clients or customers are having issues with it generating their margins and their profits, and so they want you to be able to give up as well. And one of those things is that just as virtual has removed some of the relational aspects, as Northwestern University has discovered that in-person salespeople can use charisma much more than they can virtually. It's about content. It's about what are your ideas when you're virtual, but also this idea of now that we are in this world that we're in, the relationships sort of matter less. The relational aspect of we've always bought from you is getting handed over to people who are making really hard analyses of what's the price. And until the salespeople are able to communicate that clearly, what happens is you tend to move towards the lowest common denominator. And the question ultimately is, how well do your salespeople understand value and then ultimately negotiate? I like to say that negotiation is the one point where the salespeople, when we ask them to build relationships, we ask them to create a bond with that buyer, and then the first big conflict usually comes up around price. And there's just far too many people that we work with, frankly, who, when they hit that first conflict, believe that they need to say yes to anything because they need to be able to win that, and they need to keep the relationship. So it's really important that you've trained your folks to negotiate well, to understand the difference between a trust-based relationship and just a, I like you relationship. Metrics mania, number 4. Are you really looking at the right KPIs? When in-person became virtual, a lot of the things that people started to look at had to be rethought. It used to be about calls per day. I was working with a client, in fact, this week, and we started talking about some people who were struggling. The very first thing they went to was, how many dials per day? How many dials per day? What we've seen since then is people have been rethinking it. If it was an external in-person number of visits per day, that number's probably gone up with virtual. They're looking more at call quality, not just a connection where you drop off a business card or have a brief conversation, but what have you learned? What have you identified? What's going to help you in the very next call that you're going along? And again, another client I was working with this week, the management team was saying, boy, you learn something in one meeting, you come back and build on that in the next one. And in 2 or 3 calls, you've built a great, strong trust relationship, and you really understand the model that they've got. So what's the takeaway? I think, quite frankly, it's how good are my people at negotiating? And on the management side of it, what's the difference between a no deal and a bad deal for a salesperson? Because sometimes from their personal reward, their personal compensation, it's far, far, far superior to take a bad deal rather than a no deal. And where in your organization do you want to be looking for those, judging those, and rewarding those? Another takeaway is to really look at the KPIs you've been using. I would guess if they were the same ones you're using 2 years ago, they're probably outdated. But be thinking about what are the things that really make things happen. Yes, dials and calls are always going to be important, but look at the conversion ratio of how many of those become quality conversations or become opportunities. That's the key important part. If someone's making 100 dials and finding 3 quality opportunities and somebody else is making 20 and finding 3, understand what the difference is there. Is it a training issue for the rep? Is it the quality of the list? This idea of understand what the metric is and then compare where folks are individually to see where you should be improving is gotten much more important now that we're into this new normal. And then finally, the last couple that we've seen, and this is going to strike a lot of you as strange, but we believe increasingly that culture is overwhelming compensation, particularly as it relates to people who are thinking about leaving. I come from a generation, the boomer generation, where you could always throw more money at somebody to get them to work harder. It was a great incentive. But we're seeing repeatedly that folks are having different priorities. They're used to being home. They're a little more burned out. They don't have quite that same level of energy to go out and be engaged in things. And so, as we talked about a few webcasts ago, we have seen people give plans to folks that say, look, you hit your quota for the day in terms of quality conversations, and you're done. You can go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to be success-based in our metrics, not time-based in our metrics, because over and over and over again, flexibility, even beyond being remote, even beyond being able to vary your hours, that flexibility is the number one thing people are looking for right now. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think when people get a taste for it, it's going to be an issue we have for our employees for a long time. Also think about compensation, right? Uh, why should your people stay? I always like to ask managers that question. Why should someone stay here? And if the answer is, well, they can make a lot of money, I'm not sure that always works anymore. They're thinking about what's my quality of life. I don't know if we have any lawyers listening, but I've known too many lawyers with big law firms who have labored for many years to get right before that step of partner and just said, you know what, it's not worth it. I don't want to be doing it all of my life. And I've known some who've gone off and gone into teaching high school because it was a more rewarding environment for them, not financially, but from just a living life perspective. And then the last one, integrated team selling. One company, one voice. When someone calls, they want an answer. Especially draw the circle bigger. Do you have reps? Do you have distributors? Do you have service technicians? The client doesn't care. The customer doesn't care if that person's a field person or an inside person. When they ask a question, they want to be able to get the answer as quickly as possible. And so that means sharing data better. It means rethinking the way we've done things. About 15 years ago, I did a project with Synoptics. They were eventually merged into a company called Bay Networks. But Synoptics actually flipped the typical inside-outside group. They had a group of inside people who would call, who would develop leads, and who would book appointments for the outside folks. And the outside folks every week would get a travel schedule in a set of airline tickets or a map in terms of where they needed to go, and they would go do the follow-up work. Before that model, it seemed like, the field people were seniors, the inside people were less senior. If you've got an inside-outside team, think about how you balance the skills. Think about even how you balance location and where they might be, and how you can be better in terms of answering that question. So again, if you have the same org structure as you did 5 years ago, where you're spending money in the same percentages of areas, probably time to relook that. Look at effectiveness. Look at lines of business in terms of what is really profitable, what are the appropriate costs associated with those. Are they truly additive? I've been in a lot of conversations where people say, well, we don't really make a lot of money in this particular area, but it helps us in these others. And quite honestly, most of the time, those conversations are about talking yourself into supporting a decision that was not right 5 or 6 years ago, and you just don't want to step up and make the change. And then, so what do we do with all of this? Well, we believe there's a new kind of skill set emerging for salespeople. Solid selling skills are never going to go out of style. You've got to be able to prospect. You've got to be able to listen and ask questions and to discover very well. You've got to be able to communicate your value in a way that's unique to that particular customer. You got to be able to negotiate, hold your position, and understand about any particular transaction is usually about a lot more than just price. But on top of that, we think there's some new skills that need to be done. We think we need this idea of being a sales guide. As the buyer becomes more empowered, they're looking for people who can help them not just understand the product, but in many cases get through the sales process in the organization. We see increasingly larger companies who will, divisional director heads will make decisions, and then they'll say, well, it's going to go off to purchasing and legal. Who knows when it comes out from there? And salespeople need to understand to be able to help that. They need to work better with buyers. Buyers are too often seen as the enemy. It's like, I want to talk to them absolutely last. I want to treat them like all they are is transactional, is process, is purchase order, and that's it. And the reality is that buyers are becoming more important as the financial side, or as one of our clients said, as the spreadsheet takes more and more into environments. And I know there's a real gap, wide breadth of the people who listen to our podcast. So you may be somebody who's been living with that reality for a very long time. You may be some folks who are just now starting to realize, oh yeah, buyers are much more critical. This idea of understanding and holding value, really critical to be able to make sure you're not hurrying through and just doing your product pitches. The stress we're under makes us less effective than we normally are. We tend to hurry, and as a result of that hurry, we tend to give away value. And then things like, you have to have people who can collaborate well. Lone wolf salespeople are not going to survive very long. And then the last one, I'm going to call it technology applied wisely. Look, there are a billion different pieces of technology out there, and I'm not saying you need to add any more. In fact, I would say that right now, with all the changes going on, you just need to ask yourself the question, am I using the technology I've got efficiently? How many of you have a CRM that's sort of working, but sort of not? If you've got a CRM and yet you're still building your reports in Excel and manipulating them, that says to me you're wasting time because the tool's not right. So focus in on those that can really add value. That's what we believe is going to be required for salespeople going forward from here, when they can use the right digital tool, when they use the right in-person skill, and how they get closer and understand their buyers better from a business to business perspective. That's our sense. As Michelle said, we're going to send out the book to everybody who, or the first 2 chapters of the book, to anybody who registered for the webinar, so you can see kind of some additional information, some examples, et cetera, in those. But let's open it up to questions. Any questions for us now in terms of what we see as the data? Is your experience the same as what Michelle said? Or on the trends, how do you feel about those? Is there something you think we missed? A question about how to react to any of those? Go ahead and either use chat or use the Q&A window to send those in to us.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Russ, I'm going to throw a loaded question at you. Are we 2022 or are we 2022?
Oh, great
Part
question,
2.
Michelle. And the answer is yes and yes. For the people who have just been holding on and saying, boy, we're not going to change an awful lot. We're just going to go, as soon as this virus is over, we're going back, and are kind of treating life as we've just been on, like on when you put your Netflix on pause and we're going to hit play again. It's 2020 part 2, because it's not going to get any better. You may have made it through COVID, but there's other things that are going to be coming at you that are going to be blocking that. And then if you've been kind of thinking about how your business changes, what's new and what's going on, then I do believe that it's 2022. I think your next 6 months is going to look very different than the 6 months we had in 2020, regardless of what the attack is that gets us. We had a question come in. Do you anticipate travel and customer visits returning anytime soon? And again, as Michelle said earlier, this is really a variable based on where you are in the world, or even where you are in the US. The answer is, in my opinion, yes, but I think that the ability to travel is going to continue to open up. And again, I'm no doctor. I don't even play one on TV, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But I do believe that we're getting to the point where people are going to be, doing more airline travel. In fact, airline travel has gone up, visiting, driving to and staying in hotels, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that happens. The question is how quickly customers are going to open up their facilities. And I think the real, the risk is that they may stay more locked down longer than the general kind of society. You're going to be able to go to restaurants a lot sooner than you're going to be able to wander customer factory floors, because they've got the memory of the pain of being shut down from these different pandemics, et cetera. As well as some of them are going to be offering their folks the flexibility to work from home. So they're going to be in the office less often, which is going to change the dynamic of a visit. And then some of your companies have decided, gee, we've survived pretty well without having the same amount of travel. So how do we take some of those funds and funnel them into other things? So the answer is yes, but I think the quality and the timing of the visits are going to be different. And I think that that's going to be paced both probably more by the customer side, but also a little bit by our own finance groups.
Yeah, I agree with that, Russ. And I think just remembering some data, and I don't remember exact numbers, but some information that we've seen in the last year or so, I think companies will also really evaluate the purpose of the visit. So you may find, in fact, we saw some research that said that many customers would like to see salespeople, for instance, once the initial purchase has been made, for that relationship development. And more salespeople think that it's more important to go make that first presentation in person to get that first purchase.
Yeah.
So I think people will be evaluating, the purpose of the meeting, the quality of it, the size of the opportunity. So there's a whole lot going into it as well, just to add to what you were saying.
Well, and we've seen from clients over the last couple of years that you can actually more efficiently cover a territory when you're doing virtual. You can meet in different states in the same day. You can do follow-up that same day. Again, not saying that that's the way it's always going to be. That's why we call it a hybrid. It's when do I use in person? When do I use virtual to have the best effects in my territory?
Agree. And I think that's one of the opportunities. We talk about challenges or problems and opportunities, but one of the opportunities of the environment that we're in is for organizations to really, look at these trends that we've talked about, especially like collaboration, and think about the structure of their sales teams and the roles and their accountabilities and responsibilities. And is there a way to do more and do it better and serve the client better as well?
It reminded me of some feedback I got. I think this was, I can't remember the source of it. It's not my own, but there was a sales manager who just said, well, the first time I lose a deal because my person wasn't there in person, then we're all going back to the way it was. And that the person they were speaking to said, well, that's really interesting. He said, first of all, that assumes you did everything else right in the selling process. And that was the only mistake. And then he said, second of all, what happens when you are there in person and the other company wins virtually? Does that mean you change and go back to virtual? And so we can't take any one data point and drive it into too much.
Right. Looks like we do have a couple of more questions that came through.
Okay.
So moving through the pandemic, do you believe trade show and in-person sales meetings are becoming less valuable to customers?
I think trade shows in general, again, personal opinion, I think trade shows will be. I think that meetings where you're bringing associations or smaller groups together, where there's a higher educational content, I think there's still going to be a gathering for those, particularly in things like medical. Again, because of budgets and everything else, and just effectiveness of information and what's there. But yes, I think that customers will at least front load a lot of that. We're already seeing data. They're pre-selecting vendors based on what they can find on the web. And so you're going to be deeper in the sales conversation than you typically are either at a trade show or when you show up at the first time. Now, the one exception to that, and I think this is something we've seen going on for a while, trade shows become great events to bring in existing customers, renew agreements, or to show them new products. So there is a function, but I think the industry is going to call what works and what doesn't.
All right, next question. What are some tips to manage production's inability to deliver after a sale is complete, like based on supply chain? So you can't basically get the product.
Yep.
After the sale.
So I don't know if this is good news or not, but the good news is so many people are having this issue that when you go in and have the problem, it's no longer considered to be your issue as a vendor. It's now considered to be our issue between the vendor and the customer. I think that the best thing you can do is make sure you're the one who communicates first. When you've got a delay or you've got a slippage, make sure your people are proactive in reaching out. It should never be a surprise. It should never wait until just the day before, or especially if you're late to deliver it. And I think you need to be able to, again, from that transparency perspective, open up some of the visibility. You don't have to air all of the laundry that you see in production, but you should let them know in terms of what is the issue. Is the issue you can't find the people to run the production floor? Is it a supply chain issue where items are sitting on a ship in Long Beach Harbor and they can't get them off and put on a train, or they can't find a truck to move it? And then what are you doing as an organization to be able to get that order fulfilled? People have to have a narrative. They have to have a story to understand. They can't just keep hearing, I don't know, it's who knows when it's going to be fixed. So you've got to be able to give them the best of your ability. Don't get too far over your skis. Be as honest as you can. And that honesty, I believe, is going to continue to be rewarded, because ultimately people want to buy from people they trust, and do everything you can to rebuild that trust.
All right, thank you. Great answer. And I think that's probably something a lot of organizations are dealing with right now. To your point, I go back to those silver linings. You're probably not the only organization in your industry that's having those issues.
Yeah. And it becomes a chance for your salespeople to separate and be different than other people in the industry. If you're more proactive, if you have just some more transparency, you're going to be perceived as a better and stronger player than if you're just either seen as average, or you really don't want to be seen as below average or subpar.
All right. I believe that is all of the questions. And we want to thank you all for joining us. And just as a reminder, look out for your free book preview. So it's chapters 1 and 2 that of the book that Russ and I have co-authored, Sales Leadership for the New Normal. It's Agile and Resilient, Sales Leadership for the New Normal. That will be appearing in your email box on February 1st, just for registering for this webinar. And again, if a lot of these issues are resonating with your organizations, if you're interested in our Confident Conversations program, please be sure to email us at contact@thebrooksgroup.com. Thank you, Russ, for sharing your wisdom today.
Thanks, Michelle. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And just watch your inbox for the book, and watch your inbox for whenever Michelle and I are back again in another webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
All right.